The dust storms tore across the barren world's surface, howling and harsh, whipping crimson sand into jagged waves. The wasteland stretched endlessly in all directions, desolate and unforgiving, casting a fitting shadow over Zaratha's spirit. Once, his scales had gleamed like polished obsidian, catching the light and reflecting the power he wielded. But now they were dull, battered, and cracked, mirroring the emptiness that seemed to seep from the world itself. Zarath lay weakened, barely able to lift his head, his once mighty wings tattered and limp. The Turnax, his own people, had left him here, deciding that his failure to defend them from an invading fleet was enough to strip him of everything, rank, honor, and place among them. He'd been their protector, their chosen, the very embodiment of their strength. Yet one failure had been enough for them to cast him aside, as if he were nothing but a broken relic of a past they wished to forget. Each breath felt like fire inside him, each pulse of his fading flame a reminder of how close he was to losing the last remnants of his power. Zaratha's flame was no ordinary fire. It was the core of his being, the lifeblood that had once given him strength to soar through battles, to defend his people with ferocity. Now, it flickered weakly, nearly extinguished, a dull ember where once a brilliant inferno had raged. In the galaxy, word had spread quickly of his fall from grace. The Turnax had made sure of that, broadcasting his exile as a lesson to all who might consider challenging their unforgiving code. A passing scout ship from a neighboring faction had recently hovered over him, its lights casting a scornful glow before it zoomed away without offering even a whisper of aid. Zarath had become a tale told by others as a warning or a mockery, a reminder of what happened to those who failed the Turnax. Yet, even through his despair, a part of Zarath clung to anger, anger at his own people for abandoning him, anger at the universe for watching and laughing. He had always been proud, always seen himself as a protector above others. Now he wondered if he had been a fool all along, loyal to beings who could discard him so easily. Pain racked his body as he tried to move. His claws, once sharp enough to cut through metal, dragged through the sand uselessly. His vision blurred, and he felt the familiar sting of shame welling up within him. In his mind, he saw the faces of the Turnax elders, their expressions cold and detached as they passed their judgment. He could still hear the words of the High Commander, echoing in his mind, *. You are no longer worthy. You are a disgrace to us all. *. He had been left here with nothing, no hope, no purpose, and no one who cared if he lived or died. His flame guttered, flickering once more, a reminder that he was dangerously close to the end. Part of him thought it would be easier to let go, to sink into the darkness and leave this cruel world behind. But even in his lowest moments, Zaratha's pride refused to yield entirely. He was Zarath, after all, once the mightiest of his people, the defender of 1,000 lives. How had it come to this? Just as the edges of his consciousness began to fray, he heard something faint, a signal, barely distinguishable over the roar of the storm. His senses, dulled as they were, picked up the unique tonal shifts of a human language. His pride scoffed at the thought. Humans were fragile creatures, less evolved than the Turnax, and rarely ventured this far into the galaxy. What business could they possibly have on a forsaken planet like this? Despite himself, Zarath listened, feeling a flicker of curiosity, a sensation he hadn't felt in what seemed like ages. The signal grew stronger, shifting from static to clarity. Words reached him, carried by a voice he didn't recognize but somehow found compelling, resolute. "This is Dr. Naomi Reyes," the voice said. "We've detected a distress signal and are approaching to investigate. Whoever you are, if you can hear this, help is on the way." Help? The words stirred something within him. But he pushed the notion aside as quickly as it surfaced. No one would help him, especially not humans. They were curious, yes, but they lacked the strength to endure a place like this. Besides, if he couldn't trust his own people, what made him think he could trust these strange creatures? Yet, his pride was wavering, worn thin by his suffering. If humans were coming, perhaps he'd watch them try and fail, let them see the depths of his despair before sending them away. He had nothing to lose, after all. The signal grew stronger as the human crew's vessel neared, its engines a low hum that contrasted sharply with the storm's relentless howl. Inside, Dr. Naomi Reyes, a seasoned exobiologist with a stubborn streak, checked the readings again, her eyes narrowing with intrigue. She was familiar with the rumors: a dragon stranded, a fallen warrior left for dead, but they had seemed more like myth than reality. Yet here they were, closing in on a distress signal that matched those whispers. Against her better judgment, and against explicit orders, she was here, drawn by a deep-seated curiosity and a desire to help, despite the risks. Beside her, her team exchanged uneasy glances. Each was skilled, hand-picked for their adaptability, but not all were as enthusiastic as their leader about the mission's purpose. The planet was hostile, barren, and far from any reinforcements. Still, Naomi had convinced them to come, her passion contagious even to the cautious members of her crew. Her quiet but unyielding confidence drove them forward, and though they felt nervous, they couldn't deny that same spark of excitement and curiosity she had ignited in them. As they approached the source of the signal, the crew got their first visual of the creature. Even battered and broken, the sight of Zareth was awe-inspiring. His massive frame lay half buried in sand, his scales dull but somehow still hinting at the strength he had once held. His wings were torn, the membrane between each bone fractured, hanging limply against his sides. One of the younger crew members gasped softly, unable to hide their shock. It was like looking at a fallen god, a figure from an ancient story laid low. Naomi felt a rush of empathy surge through her, yet she kept her voice steady as she directed the crew to approach slowly. Zareth, despite his weakened state, sensed their presence, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The humans could see the faint glow of his flame, flickering dangerously low, a visual representation of his dwindling life force. His gaze sharpened on them, and for a moment, Naomi thought she saw a flicker of pride buried beneath the exhaustion, a vestige of the warrior he once had been. When Naomi stepped forward, Zareth let out a low, rumbling growl, his gaze warning them not to come closer. She raised her hands in a gesture of peace, her voice steady but firm. "We're here to help," she said. "You don't have to trust us, but we won't leave you to die here." Zareth's eyes narrowed further, his voice a gravelly echo. "Humans, meddlesome, foolish beings. Do you pity me, weak as I am?" Naomi held his gaze, unflinching. "It's not about pity. It's about doing what's right. If you want us to leave, we will. But we believe in giving everyone a chance to survive." Zareth scoffed, a bitter sound that cut through the tension. "You think your help matters? I was cast aside by my own people, left here as nothing more than refuse. And you think you, fragile creatures that you are, can do anything?" One of the crew members shifted uncomfortably, but Naomi held her ground. "We know what it's like to be abandoned. Humanity's history is full of it. But we also know what it means to find strength in those dark places." Her words seemed to reach him, and for a brief moment, Zareth's expression softened, though he quickly masked it. "You are persistent, human. Fine, do as you will. But know that I do not need your pity. I am Zareth, once protector of the Turnax." Naomi's tone softened but remained respectful. "We're not here to give you pity, Zareth. We're here because we respect what you've been through, and because no one deserves to die alone in a place like this." Zareth allowed them to approach, though his posture remained tense. As the crew set up their equipment, preparing to treat his wounds, he watched them warily, unused to such gestures of kindness without hidden motives. The humans moved quickly, using medkits and limited supplies to clean the wounds marring his scales. They worked in silence, their expressions focused, their hands steady. It was clear they knew the risks, yet they pressed on, unfazed by the danger his presence implied. Slowly, as they worked, Zareth's suspicions began to shift to a guarded curiosity. He observed the care with which they treated him, each action purposeful and gentle. He could feel their efforts renewing his strength, if only slightly. The idea that they would do this for him, a creature they'd only heard tales of, baffled him. There was no gain in it for them, no advantage. And yet they were here, determined, ignoring his scorn as if it were nothing. When the crew finally finished, Zareth found himself looking at them with something almost like respect. Though he wouldn't admit it, he was impressed by their resilience, by their refusal to back down despite his hostility. Naomi looked at him then, her gaze unwavering. "We'll stay close and keep an eye on you until you're strong enough to move." Zaratha's voice was quieter this time, his usual venom absent. "And what do you gain from this, human? Why go to such lengths for a being who is nothing to you?" Naomi shrugged, her expression one of calm resolve. "Sometimes we help because it's the right thing to do. You don't have to understand it, but that's how we see things." For a moment, Zarath was silent, processing her words. This notion of helping without expectation was foreign to him. Among the Turnaks, strength was everything, and weakness was not tolerated. To see these humans disregarding his scorn and focusing solely on aiding him went against everything he'd known. He struggled with it, torn between his deeply ingrained beliefs and the undeniable truth that these humans were, in fact, helping him survive. As they continued their work, Naomi spoke again, softly. "You're a fighter, Zarath. I can see that. But maybe sometimes, even the strongest need someone else to stand by them." Zaratha's gaze softened imperceptibly, a small crack in the stoic mask he wore. There was something in these humans, a resilience he hadn't expected. For the first time in his life, he wondered if perhaps his people's way wasn't the only path. The days passed, and with each one, Zarath felt a faint spark of strength returning. The humans had set up a makeshift camp around him, their equipment arranged to shelter him from the worst of the storms. They continued to care for his injuries, applying salves and repairing his damaged scales with techniques and technology he'd never seen. Their hands, though small and fragile, worked with precision and patience. Zarath found himself observing them, curious about the creatures who so fearlessly dedicated themselves to helping a being they'd only just met. Dr. Naomi Reyes remained a steady presence, checking on him regularly and speaking with him as she worked. She shared stories of Earth, of humanity's own battles, its resilience, and its endless determination to survive against all odds. She told him about human explorers who had ventured into the unknown, even when they had nothing to gain but knowledge. Zarath listened in silence, pretending disinterest, yet he found himself drawn to her words, to the way she spoke with quiet pride and conviction. He could feel a strange warmth, a feeling of camaraderie he hadn't felt in years, a sensation he didn't yet have words for. As the humans continued their efforts, Zarath grew more aware of his surroundings, his senses sharpening once more. He noted their adaptability, the way they scavenged resources from the barren land, how they modified their equipment to better suit his unique needs. When he voiced surprise at their ingenuity, Naomi only smiled, shrugging. "Humans are resourceful," she said simply. "We may not be the strongest or the smartest, but we know how to survive. And we know how to help each other survive." One afternoon, as they worked on repairing his wings, Zarath felt a pang of shame that caught him off guard. It wasn't the humiliation of his exile that haunted him now, but something deeper, an ache at having dismissed these beings as weak and insignificant. He couldn't ignore the fact that, despite his initial hostility, these humans had never wavered in their kindness, nor had they asked for anything in return. For the first time, he began to wonder if his own people's obsession with strength had clouded his view of what true power might look like. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alarm from the human camp. Naomi and her team went on alert, scanning the skies as a sleek scout ship appeared on the horizon, descending quickly. Zarath recognized the markings on the vessel, a rival faction known for scavenging and opportunistic attacks. The humans moved into defensive positions, readying their weapons. Zarath forced himself to rise, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Though he was still weak, he felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since his exile, a need to protect. The scout ship landed, and several hostile aliens emerged, armed and ready. They sneered at the humans, clearly viewing them as easy prey. One of the aliens, a towering figure with sharp, predatory eyes, gestured toward Zarath with a mocking grin. "So, the mighty dragon is reduced to this," he taunted. "Relying on weaklings to keep him alive." Zaratha's anger flared, and his flame burned a fraction brighter. He stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "These weaklings have more courage than you could ever understand. The alien sneered but looked wary, sensing the strength returning to Zaratha's frame. The humans, standing firm beside him, didn't flinch. Together, they formed a line, presenting a united front. Naomi's expression was calm, her gaze steady as she addressed the hostile alien. "Leave," she said firmly. "You're not welcome here." A tense silence followed, and for a moment, it seemed the aliens might attack. But seeing Zaratha's unwavering stance, backed by the humans, they hesitated. With a final glare, the leader signaled his team, and they retreated to their ship, lifting off in a cloud of dust. When the ship finally disappeared over the horizon, Zarath felt a rush of relief mingled with pride. He had stood alongside the humans, and together they had held their ground. Afterward, Naomi approached him, her gaze full of a quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. Zarath felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words, and he nodded, struggling to find a response. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not as a weapon or a disgrace, but as something worthy of respect. That night, as they sat around a small fire, Zarath found himself speaking of his past. He told Naomi and her crew about the Turnax, about their unforgiving code, their strict hierarchy, and how failure was punished by exile or worse. He described his final battle, the one that had led to his disgrace, and how his own people had abandoned him without a second thought. The humans listened without judgment, their faces reflecting a mixture of sadness and understanding. Naomi's expression softened, and when he finished, she spoke quietly. "Sometimes those who are supposed to stand by us are the ones who turn away the fastest. But that doesn't mean you don't have a place or a purpose." Her words struck a chord within him. He had been defined by the Turnax's rigid expectations for so long that he'd forgotten he could exist outside of them. For the first time, he began to see his exile as something other than a mark of shame. It could be a chance, a new beginning, a way to redefine himself. Over the following days, Zaratha's strength continued to grow, aided by the humans' constant care. They worked on his wings, creating a harness with salvaged materials that would allow him to move more freely. He practiced standing, flexing his wings, feeling a surge of exhilaration at the gradual return of his power. Each time he managed to stand a little longer, the humans cheered him on, their encouragement infectious. He found himself almost smiling at their enthusiasm, a sensation that felt strange but welcome. Their persistence reminded him that strength wasn't merely a matter of power or rank. True strength, he realized, came from resilience, from the ability to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. One evening, as he stood beside Naomi, looking out over the wasteland, she turned to him, her gaze thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "I think you're stronger now than you ever were before." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply within him. He understood now what she meant, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, nor did he need to cling to the shame of his past. He was stronger not because of his flame or his title, but because he had found a purpose beyond the expectations of his people. Zaratha's flame glowed a little brighter that night, not as a warrior's weapon, but as a symbol of his newfound resolve. The stillness of the night was shattered by the distant hum of engines. Zaratha's keen senses picked up the sound immediately, and he tensed, recognizing it instantly, a Turnax vessel. His own people had returned, but he felt no relief. There was no rescue mission for the exiled. If they were here, it was for one reason: to ensure his disgrace was absolute, to erase the last trace of his existence. Naomi and her team quickly noticed his reaction. She approached, her expression filled with determination and a quiet understanding. "Are they here to finish what they started?" she asked softly, though she seemed to already know the answer. Zarath nodded grimly. He could see the flashes of armor through the thickening dust as his former comrades disembarked, fanning out across the landscape, weapons at the ready. Despite the risk, Naomi's team began gathering supplies and checking weapons, their movements calm and methodical. Zarath observed them, moved by the fact that they didn't even consider abandoning him. These humans, strangers just days ago, now stood with him, prepared to face his people without hesitation. For so long, He believed loyalty was something earned through status or power. Now, he understood it ran much deeper. The Turnak soldiers, led by an imposing commander Zareth knew all too well, approached with cold efficiency. Zareth's former commander, a figure who had once praised him, who had spoken of his bravery and strength with respect, now looked upon him with scorn. The commander's voice echoed through the wasteland, amplified by a translator for all to hear. "Zareth," he spat, "the Turnaks have no place for failures. You know the code. It is only fitting you meet your end here, away from our people, with no honor left to your name." Zareth felt the sting of his former leader's words, but he stood firm, his flame flickering as he steadied himself. He wasn't alone this time. Naomi took a step forward, her voice steady, cutting through the silence with surprising strength. "He's not alone. If you want him, you'll have to go through us." A murmur rippled through the Turnak soldiers, surprised by the defiance of creatures they considered weak. Zareth's former commander sneered, gesturing dismissively toward the humans. "These beings mean nothing. They're an inconvenience at best, Zareth. Will you die for them?" But Zareth didn't waver. He looked at Naomi and her team, their faces resolute, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride, not just in himself but in his allies. "These humans have shown me more strength and honor than my own people ever have," he replied, his voice steady, his flame surging just a little brighter. "If you wish to take me down, I will not make it easy for you." The commander's face twisted with anger, and he signaled his soldiers to attack. Chaos erupted as the Turnaks surged forward, their weapons drawn, moving with deadly precision. Naomi and her team sprang into action, using their surroundings for cover, retaliating with a blend of human resourcefulness and quick thinking. Despite being outmatched in firepower and size, the humans moved with agility and tenacity, their unity a sharp contrast to the rigid hierarchy of the Turnaks. Zareth fought beside them, his flame flaring brighter with each clash. He felt the strength returning to his limbs, his wings stretching as if to shake off the last remnants of weakness. With every strike, he felt not just the power of his own strength but the resilience of the humans beside him. They were small, fragile compared to the Turnaks, yet they fought with a fierceness he hadn't known existed. In the heat of battle, Zareth saw Naomi narrowly avoid a Turnak soldier's blade, rolling out of harm's way with quick precision. Her eyes met his, filled with an unspoken promise that they would stand together, no matter the outcome. He had never known such loyalty, not from his people, not from those he had once called his brothers. The bond he shared with these humans felt stronger than any allegiance forged in battle. As the fight wore on, the Turnaks began to falter, surprised by the resistance. They had expected Zareth to be broken, weak, unworthy of their time. But here he stood, a formidable opponent, reignited by something they couldn't understand. He was no longer fighting alone or for a people who had cast him aside. He was fighting for those who had stood by him, for the strange, resilient beings who had seen worth in him when his own kind had not. The commander watched, his expression turning from scorn to something approaching fear. He raised his weapon, prepared to make a final strike, but Zareth's flames surged, bright and fierce. With a powerful sweep of his wing, he sent the commander sprawling, the strength in his movements a testament to the human's relentless care. The remaining Turnak soldiers hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They looked to their leader, waiting for orders that no longer came. One by one, they began to retreat, recognizing the strength they had underestimated. When the last of the Turnaks had vanished into the wasteland, the humans and Zareth stood in silence, their breaths heavy but triumphant. Naomi approached him, a quiet smile on her face, respect evident in her gaze. "Looks like you're not so alone after all," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Zareth looked down at her, his expression softening. For so long, he had defined himself by his people's standards, by their rigid expectations and unforgiving judgment. But now, standing among these humans, he felt a sense of belonging he had never known. His flame burned steadily, brighter than it had in years. He understood now that strength wasn't measured by rank or title but by the bonds forged in moments of adversity. As the humans began packing up their equipment, preparing to leave the wasteland, Zareth felt a pang of emotion he hadn't expected. This world, once a place of exile and despair, had become something else entirely, a place of rebirth, of newfound purpose. He knew he would no longer be a protector of the Turnax, bound by their rigid codes. Instead, he had found a new calling, one defined not by duty or fear, but by choice. As they prepared to leave, Naomi looked at him, her gaze filled with something almost like friendship. "Ready for what comes next?" Zareth nodded, his voice steady. "I am. For the first time, I feel truly ready." Together, they left the wasteland behind, heading toward whatever awaited them in the vast unknown. Zareth knew that challenges lay ahead, but he was no longer bound by his past. With these humans by his side, he had found something more enduring than status or power. He had found loyalty, purpose, and perhaps even family, a family that, unlike his own people, would never abandon him.